Light on India's tech startup ecosystem and hiring outlook. Well, India's startup ecosystem is showing early signs of a recovery even as companies are cautiously expanding their hiring capacity. Now, this after a turbulent 2023 and a year of course correction in 2024. In fact, data from Xpheno, a specialist staffing firm, that suggests that the total headcount for funded startups closed at 5.9 lakh in FY25 and is projected to rise to 6.7 lakh in FY26. In fact, attrition, that's essentially what Xpheno suggests, that attrition that will continue to stay in the 16 to 18% range. But what are the larger compensation expectations from the industry? Is equity still an important part of the puzzle, and how will the rest of this year be given global volatility and cautiousness in funding? Let's bring on board now Kamal Karan, the co-founder of Xpheno, to discuss some of those points and more. Thank you very much, Kamal, for joining us here on ET Now. So, Kamal, when you look at the larger funding picture in the Indian startup ecosystem in H1 of 2025, in fact, the ecosystem witnessed $7.6 billion in funding, which is essentially a decline of 19% when you compare it with H2 of 2024. However, data also suggests that India still ranks third in terms of investments that the ecosystem attracted in H1 of 2025. Given that as the background, that funding, picture, how are you looking at hiring trends? How have hiring trends, especially for white-collared roles in tech startups over the past 6 months?
If you look at the hiring per se, every year the tech startups have steadily added tech headcounts. Even in the worst of the years, even last year, if we thought it was not so good, we still saw close to about 60,000 net headcounts added. When I say net headcounts, you have to remember that they possibly would have hired close to about a lakh of technology people, and there is a replacement hiring as well. So net, even if I look at the first half of this year, close to 35,000 technology professionals have been hired by the tech startups. So depends on which side you see. We want to compare that to, let's say, 21, 22, when there was, kind of a boom in hiring. So compared to that, it is less. But I think overall, every year we have seen tech startups adding 60 to 80,000 technology professionals to the overall ecosystem of tech startups.
I'm not so sure if you can call that a bullish outlook, but Kamal, how does that compare to last year, and how many consulting or contractual positions are now reflecting in hiring trends?
Yeah, I think if you want to look at last 2 years per se, I think if I had to go back from 22 to, let's say, now 25, the year that has just ended, I think from 2022 to 23, almost 1.5 lakh technology professionals were added to the startup ecosystem. 2023, almost a lakh people got added. And 24, financial year 24, only 30,000 technology professionals net got added. And last year, close to 60,000. So I think on a year-on-year basis, if you ask me from last year to this year, last year we have seen almost 60,000 net additions of professionals. And the projection for this year, Sumita, is that we expect to see almost a lakh of technology professionals to be added. That means that over last year, when we end this financial year, we will see almost doubling, 60,000 to almost a lakh net technology professionals addition. So that's the outlook.
And when you take us through the hiring picture, which are the top sectors that are providing employment, and have these hiring letters, which are given every year to companies, for instance, IT companies have seen a slowdown in hiring. But when it comes to startups, how many of these actual hiring letters have translated into recruitment?
See, 20% of the startup hiring, especially in the technology space, is in the fintech space. They have the kind of a scale, if you can call it. They also received the best of the funding the preceding 2 years, and almost 25 unicorns in that space. So you can expect that the top sector will remain fintech, even going by the replacements that they're going to do. Though you may not see great amount of expansion hiring because they've crossed the inflection point. And as you know, Sumita, usually it is Series A and the seed funding is when the inflection point for any startup is when it comes to headcount additions. That's when they ramp up the maximum. So some of them, especially in the fintech space, have an opportunity to hire more contract people because they have spaces where they won't expect people to go on the field and enroll customers. So you could always see that some of the large fintech, enterprises or startups will have a disproportionate amount of contract employees on the field. So some of them may have 10, 15, 20,000 kind of numbers. But last year they sort of peaked, so we don't expect any great additions. In fintech this year it will be at best incremental. However, just to look at AI-driven startups, which have been about 120 have got funded in the last 1 year. We don't see a great number of headcount addition. As you can imagine, AI being AI, you cannot say I'm an AI firm and say I've hired 5,000 people, right? So we see on an average these 120 AI-funded startups have about 50 to 60 people on an average. So, but that's a new segment. So fair amount of hiring is happening there. But these 120 AI startups have added about 4,500 tech headcounts. So that is, in a way, post fintech. You can see there's a segment where we see hiring happening, but we don't have the kind of AI talent that, let's say, Silicon Valley has. So that's to keep in context to where hiring is happening besides fintech. I think it's if you look at the kind of AI startups we have, they are not on par with Silicon Valley. Let's say the kind of tech talent that is there in Silicon Valley, who are rumored to be hired at the cost of $100 million kind of talent. We possibly have kind of a talent which is only available for AI servicing. We do not have too many companies. You can see only 120 have got funded. So you do not have the scale and the quality of talent that Silicon Valley boasts of today. So the volume of hiring there is that limited. So you can see that we have about 80 of them are in the Series A and seed level. So they have hired about 40 people each one of them. And whereas some of the companies who have gone to Series C, they have actually had a little more. So on average, if they're hiring 40 to 60, you can only expect that much kind of employment to happen in AI-funded startups.
And how has the picture been with respect to fresher hiring versus experienced professionals hiring? I mentioned just a short while back, in fact, that fresher hiring has been a bit muted, especially when it comes to the IT sector. But how has the picture been when it comes to startups?
Definitely, it's going to be another year of a kind of a tight year for fresher hiring. You have to remember that the IT services companies, whether it is the multinational IT services companies or the Indian IT services companies or the mid-tier IT services companies, are the ones who absorb the maximum amount of freshers from the market. Out of 8 lakh engineers who pass out from India, the 4-year BE course or BTech course as we call that. So in that, the best year was 21, 22, when 6 lakh freshers got absorbed. Last year, close to 110,000 fresher engineers got absorbed by the IT services industry. So if you look at the overall numbers, it's still going to be another tight year where at best about 120,000 freshers will be hired. And here again, companies are telling us clearly that they will hire the cream of the talent who can possibly be better fitted into AI world better than anybody else. So for the 8 lakh engineers passing out, it looks like the IT services industry can absorb at best a lakh of engineers. The remaining 7 lakh have to find something else for themselves.
All right, so that's a very, very bearish outlook, given that 7 lakh people will remain unemployed in ITs on the back of course, so many changes that are happening. And of course, there is AI into the picture as well. But Kamal, what are some realistic expectations with respect to compensation? Because that is also an important part. When you see some kind of a slowdown in hiring trends, when there is some kind of a delay when it comes to freshers actually joining companies, how is that reflecting in compensation expectations, especially for top roles?
See, this mismatch between what the senior talent will get or the lateral hiring tech talent will get in startups or any other ecosystems of tech versus freshers, that difference will continue. However, this year, many of these companies are going to hire more AI ready or AI equipped freshers. So they're likely to hire people in the upwards of 5.5 lakh and above. So that's a range for freshers passing out. Of course, there again we know there is a caste system. When you look at the IITs, you look at the BITS Pilanis, NITs, and then comes possibly the level 1 colleges of the big cities. So from a higher up of the outliers that we read that somebody got 40 lakh, 60 lakh kind of salaries that some of the IITians or BITS Pilanis or NITs would get, I think the average range would come down to about 5.5 lakh at the lowest. So I think this range you will expect depending on where you're going. If you're working for IT services company, you'll possibly start at 5.5 lakh if you are being hired this year, because they are not going to hire run-of-the-mill stuff. They're going to hire, sorry, they're going to hire people with a higher skill sets as well. So the range will differ, but at the same time, it's a good time to be an experienced professional, because you are doing lateral hiring. In the lateral hiring mode, companies tend to buy talent. So that means that they will always pay you 40% more than what you're earning. So the difference between a fresher and mid-level and senior level, we'll see a huge amount of difference always being there with them.
All right, Kamal, one final question before we let you go, and that is essentially on the year that's remaining, H2 of this year, how is that going to pan out, especially as far as hiring for white-collar jobs is concerned?
So if you look at the second half of the year, next 6 months coming by, we still see that startups may overall add about 50, 60,000 people, especially in the technology space. And in that, much of it, 80% of it would be people in the mid-level. That means people with 3 to 12 years experience range. So that means that an average salary of about between 12 to 1.2 crores kind of range, depending on what skill sets you bring in. So that's a kind of a salary range and range of experience that you can expect startups to hire. Clearly, the range of people, at least 1 lakh people will get hired on the higher side. But I think if I just go by the trend of what has happened in the first 6 months and the last 6 months of last year, we can average expect at least 70,000 people to be hired overall for the year. Net additions, I'm saying. In that, so the second half would see a significant number. Like I said, 35,000 people have already been hired, and we can expect that to proceed in the same number. Now, we don't see an upside to it. I think at best it will end at about 70,000 at the most conservative side. And on the higher side, we may end up at 1 lakh, which means that another 50,000 people are waiting to be hired in the technology space in the second half of this year.
Well, certainly, India's startup hiring in H1 2025 has not been about explosive growth. It's been about strategic momentum. And as we move into the second half of the year, all eyes will be on how these early hiring decisions shape outcomes of founders, investors, and of course, the broader innovation economy. Ladies and gentlemen, on that note, let's